Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues as well. Today we're going to talk about India-Japan bilateral relations. Now all eyes are on the crucial India-Japan bilateral summit, which will be held on 19th of March. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Prime Minister Narendra Modi will hold talks to further strengthen the bilateral ties. Japan and India are expected to enhance economic cooperation and share assessments on the crisis in Ukraine and Indo-Pacific as well. Now, the friendship between India and Japan has a long history rooted in spiritual affinity and strong cultural and civilizational ties as well. In fact, the year 2022 also marks 7 decades of diplomatic relations between both the nations. In today's episode of Perspective, we will discuss and analyze various aspects of this bilateral relationship and key focus areas of the forthcoming bilateral summit as well. But before we move ahead, let me introduce the distinguished guests and panelists to you as well. We are joined by 4 distinguished experts today. I'll start with former Ambassador Aftab Seth, who is joining us. He's India's former ambassador to Japan. Mr. Bharat Joshi is also with us, co-chairman CII Japan Committee. And Mr. Sanjay Bhatia, former president of PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, along with Professor Harshvi Pant, head of the Strategic Studies program at ORF, is also with us. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sansad Television. And I'd like to begin with you, Ambassador Seth, and we would like to start by understanding the context here and the scope of India-Japan bilateral relations, the ties which both the countries have in various, specific sectors, be it economy, trade, defense cooperation. Where do we stand?
Well, if we want to go, you mentioned the historical ties, which go back 1,500 or more years, from the time of Prince Shotoku Taishi. But in the 21st century, let's go back to 2000, when in August of that year, Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori broke a 10-year gap. In 1990 was the last Prime Minister Kaifu, and Mori came in August 2000, and that really was the start of the relationship that you see now 2 decades later, because that was when the global partnership between India and Japan was established. Mm-hmm. It was raised to that of a strategic and global partnership in December 2006, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh went to Japan and met Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And in 2014, September, when Prime Minister Modi was in Japan, this was raised to a special strategic and global partnership.
Okay.
Now, of course, this has several ingredients. You have mentioned some of them. But I think the most important is the defense and strategic relationship that has grown in the last 20 years. It was totally absent, I might say, before Prime Minister Modi's visit, which broke the ice. They were very annoyed with India for having done the May 98 tests. But Modi broke that frozen relationship. And this was followed by Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who went to Japan in December 2021 and carried this partnership further. Since then, the defense and foreign ministries have been meeting regularly. We have had summits, as you know, right up from 2005, April, when Junichiro Koizumi came to India. From that year on till 2019, we have had annual summits and exchanges of the 2 prime ministers visiting each other's countries, plus meeting at other forums like the UN, ASEAN, ASEAN Plus, and all that.
Okay.
And of course, in recent years, Quad. The last visit that was scheduled in 2019, December, by Shinzo Abe had to be cancelled, as you know, because of he wanted to go to Guwahati, and there were the agitations against the Citizens Amendment Act. So that was cancelled. And so we've had a gap of 2 years. Though Prime Minister Suga did meet Prime Minister Modi on the sidelines of the Quad summit in Washington in September last year. But this will be the first bilateral summit in 3 years.
Indeed.
To that extent, of course, it is significant.
Okay. Indeed, that makes it more significant than what we are looking at in terms of the achievables and the tangibles there as well. Since you spoke about the defense and the strategic partnership there, I'd like to bring in Professor Pant here. Professor Pant, from your perspective, if we have to understand the defense and strategic aspect of this partnership, and also the fact that there has been a change of guard in Japan when the last summit took place between the leadership of both the countries.
Indeed, I think what we have looked, as Ambassador Seth was suggesting, what we are looking at in India-Japan relationship today is something extraordinary. That cutting across party lines, cutting across personalities, the relationship has progressed forward. And what has happened, I think, in particular, is that the bilateral relationship that used to be looked at primarily through the prism of we are two countries with perhaps converging interests, is increasingly embedded in the larger strategic framework of the Indo-Pacific. So it is not simply a bilateral relationship which is holding on to each other's hands on economic matters or defense matters, which are important, of course, in their own right. But I think the larger strategic picture of the Indo-Pacific has shifted dramatically. And in that context, India and Japan increasingly have taken on roles that are quite, extraordinary in terms of their own history and in terms of their own aspirations. So that, I think, is a very important variable here, that Japan increasingly is becoming a power that is coming out of its shell and is willing to play a larger role in Indo-Pacific strategic periphery.
Okay.
India, of course, wants to have a larger imprint across Indo-Pacific, and Indo-Pacific is the center of gravity of global politics, global economics, global geostrategy. And I think that's where the relationship takes on an extraordinary dimension. It is not simply that we are looking at two democracies, major democracies in Asia that may have had some differences in the past, but increasingly willing to work together. But they are willing to work together not only bilaterally, but also in the larger framework. And of course, the biggest, in some ways, explication of that comes through the rise of the Quad.
Okay.
And how the folk, India and Japan sit together with Australia and the US. So I think what we are looking at in terms of India-Japan relationship is an acceptance of a new strategic reality in the Indo-Pacific, and how the two nations are increasingly willing to bear more burden of regional security, increasingly converging on various issues. Of course, there are differences, and there will be differences, like, for example, on the matter of Ukraine, which recently came up. But I think the larger reality remains that I don't think there are any two other countries which have such a degree of convergence on strategic matters as India and Japan have. And I think that the larger strategic picture evolving rapidly around India and Japan, and the reasons for them getting together, working not only for their bilateral partnership, but also how do you reconfigure the strategic periphery of Indo-Pacific, the strategic map, the security architecture. I think all those questions have has given this relationship a new sense of urgency, which I think was missing, as Ambassador Seth was explaining earlier, where we used to talk nice things, but I think there were issues on which we diverged. But suddenly now it has taken on an urgency. Both countries are willing to bet on it, and both countries are willing to bet on each other in terms of the larger strategic picture. And that's what's driving the strategic relationship. And hopefully that will also drive other aspects of this relationship. And this summit, therefore, becomes very important, coming as it does after a long hiatus that needs to be bridged. And as we point out, there is a new leadership that still is in some ways new compared to Mr. Abe, who had actually laid down the roadmap for the Indo-Pacific in more ways than one. But I think the leadership across parties, across leaders, we have seen a continuity, both in India and in Japan, in terms of making this relationship viable for the future and making this relationship central to the respective visions of the Indo-Pacific.
Okay. That sums up perfectly well when we're looking at the strategic aspect of this relationship, and we'll come back to that aspect as well in terms of geopolitics and understand as to where both the countries stand with various issues and what needs to be done. But let's look at the economic aspect also: trade, commerce, investment. We have two veteran industry representatives with us, Mr. Bharat Joshi and Mr. Sanjay Bhatia. I'll come to you one by one. I'll start with you, Mr. Joshi. When we're talking about the economic cooperation between India and Japan, we've seen a lot happening on various fronts in various sectors as well. But one, where do we stand right now? And two, the key tangible achievements or key aspects which need to be looked at.
Thank you, Vishalji. So on the economic side, I think that three cornerstones would be possibly trade, talent, and technology, to use three T's. And the trade side, of course, I mean trade as well as investments, bilateral. But also going beyond the bilateral, Japan and India both are key partners in some very substantive groupings and initiatives. And at the top of my mind, I can think of the SCRI, or the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. And this is in some ways a response to the very rapidly changing environment post-COVID, where not only trade as we knew it, but also continuity of economies and businesses and countries depends on having a resilient and a reliable, robust supply chain.
Okay.
And it's not only manufacturing and services, which of course is important, but equally food security, energy security. And by energy, not just import of oil, but even components, for instance, for renewable energy generation, and medicine or vaccine security, and so on. So, this goes on and on. So nuances are now being felt very deeply. It already has been pointed out by previous speakers of how deep the governmental relationship and the governmental structures are. But perhaps the same in this case, ironically, is not reflected in the people-to-people ties.
Okay.
It might surprise some of our viewers to note that there are almost thrice as many Nepalese in Japan as there are Indians, workers, students, and so on.
Okay.
So if you just put that into perspective, of how many Indians per capita there are, because we're a larger population, for instance, or whatever metric you choose to measure, there's clearly a huge amount of headroom for growth. As a response to this, perhaps two very successful initiatives are well underway. One is the TITP, the Technical Intern Training Program. The other is more recently launched. But whether it is through formal structures or informal visits, let's hold our horses on informal visits till the COVID and travel restrictions eased on a bit. But nevertheless, that is being addressed, and that will surely be one of the cornerstones to this relationship. And thirdly, on technology, Japan in some ways is leading the way in how one can look at country as a whole approach on DX, or digital transformation. Now, DX is, since this acceleration of the COVID pandemic, becoming a feature in organizations, companies, ministries, and so on around the world. But Japan really has taken it very seriously and set up an agency, I think about 2 years ago, equivalent to a ministry, to essentially look at DX at a national scale. So that is something very substantial, and it's clearly recognized in Japan that India has huge prowess in anything to do in terms of digital or technology or software and so on. So again, I see the relationship only deepening further. If I may speak a little bit outside of these three strict buckets,
Indeed.
You see whatever's happening on our side, whether it's Atmanirbhar Bharat in terms of manufacturing or value chains, whether it is the very, very transformative PM Gati Shakti program, or it is as a part of Gati Shakti, the huge amount of infrastructure that will be built. Let us not forget that the Japanese were our earliest partners in almost any truly significant infrastructure project that we took up. And I might remind our viewers of the Delhi Metro, which had its fair share of cynics some 2 decades ago when it started out, and people said, look, it won't work, it's not for India, we still require, poorer, or older technologies and so on. But it was a success. And thanks to the unstinted support of many agencies like JICA and others.
Indeed. And that has been a resounding success there. That's a perfect example, Mr. Joshi, which you're referring to, vis-a-vis the cooperation between India and Japan. But those three aspects, most significantly, I'd like to take to Mr. Sanjay Bhatia as well. Mr. Bhatia, would you like to add on to these 3 T's as Mr. Joshi was referring to: trade, talent, and technology? Of course, these are the key focus areas. And if you look much deeper into all these 3 areas, there are, subsectors wherein a lot of potential is there for further cooperation.
You see, my view is that what Bharat has said is absolutely, these 3 T's are important. But still, when I look at Japan, and when we talk about Japan, we always, the feeling which comes to our mind is that it's a friendly, very friendly country, which is there, and but still it is very conservative. They take a lot of time in taking decision. They analyze and they look at things deeply and then only take a step. I think that's something which is there in the culture, and we should respect that. But for India, I think they are the key partner, and the relationship has transformed to a partnership of a great substance and purpose. I think this is what has already been mentioned, and I would really re-emphasize that. Japan interest in India is increasing due to a variety of reasons, which I feel is that India's large and growing market, its resources, especially human resource. Like Bharat said, talent. So I said that human resource. These are the things which really attract. Now, in addition to that, since 2014, whatever the reforms have been done by the Modi government, I think that's something, whether it is on taxation, subsidies, labor, infrastructure, finance, whatever we may call it, or governance and all, I think that's also would attract a lot of Japanese companies to look at India and see that what they can do here. Okay. But still, I feel that Japan, in terms of trade, Japan is still the 13th. They are on the top 13 list. They are number 13 as far as the trading partners are concerned. It's, I think is about, if I know the numbers correctly, it's about close to $15 billion in 2021. Okay. That was the trade which happened between India and Japan. So there is a huge potential there, and that too, the export from India is much less than the import from Japan. So there's a negative balance which is there. So, the point is that how we can really see that going forward, India gets more opportunity to do business, increase their business in Japan. Okay. And also similarly, we attract the investments from there. Now, all these, the various campaigns initiated by the government, like Make in India or Digital India or Smart Cities or Skill India, I think all these would really attract many Japanese companies to come and invest in India. Okay. And whether it is the ease of doing business and single window clearance and industrial park, etc. So whatever I think the government is doing in the right direction, whether it is Gati Shakti as mentioned by Bharat. Okay. So I think these are the things which would really attract them to come to India. And I think the meeting gets really important from that point of view. Okay. We have a free trade agreement for with Japan, and many products are coming to India duty free and going there duty free. But currently, the issue which is going on is because of the COVID, because of the travel restrictions and the quarantine rules in Japan. Still, they have not opened up. Okay. And still, the companies there, either they are not able to travel or our people are not able to go there.
Okay.
That is also restricting the trade.
Okay.
I think that's something which is of little concern. So, I mean, way the India is opening up now, hopefully Japan would also look at and reconsider that how the business can come back on on track. And this $15 billion, let there be a target of, let's say, $30 billion in next 5 years or 10 years, whatever that number is. And that's something which would really take our relationship to a greater heights.
Okay, indeed. And, those hurdles due to COVID pandemic, which the entire world faced, of course, we're hoping that they'll be tackled with as the time passes by. But I'll come back to Ambassador Seth here. Ambassador Seth, now from the perspective of somebody who's been there, who's looked at how things move around and, different aspects of the relationship, two things which I would like to seek your opinion on is one, as Mr. Joshi was referring to, more focus perhaps on increasing people-to-people contact. That's one. Of course, the programs and policies are in place to work upon that. And also, when we're talking about the potential which is there vis-a-vis trade, commerce, investment as well, and let's not forget the strategic aspect of this relationship also. So, how should we move ahead?
Yes. First, to answer your question about what Bharat mentioned about people, he's absolutely right. There are indeed more Nepalese than there are Indians. There are more Vietnamese than there are Indian students in Japan. But don't forget that the influx of IT engineers and IT software people actually took a leap forward after Modi came here. And the visa regime for our people to go and work there loosened up. And the result of that is that between 2000 and 2006, we had hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand young engineers there, so many that we actually started a school for them, the Global Indian International School, of which I am the chairman, have been the chairman since 2006. So that is to cater essentially to our Indian people living in Japan. That's one. So I quite agree with Bharat and with Sanjay Bhatia that people-to-people contact needs to be increased. Of course, with COVID, we can't do that.
Okay.
But on the strategic front, I would just underline 2 points. One, the ongoing conflict in the Ukraine, where we are the odd man out in the Quad, in the sense that we haven't taken a firm anti-Russian position. Now, for Japan, a country which has invested fairly heavily in the oil sector, oil and gas sector of Russia in the past, there is the old kind of strategic problem with Russia. Russia still occupies what are called the northern territories, the northern islands, which they occupied in the last days of the Second World War, in the first 15 days of August, in fact, before the capitulation. And they haven't left it since. The consequence of that is that today, 77 years after the end of the Second World War, Japan and Russia do not have a peace treaty. We have to bear that in mind when we look at Japan looking at Russia. Russia is a problem for them. Second, China. The Chinese are giving the Japanese problems on the maritime front, especially in the Senkaku Islands, and also in other parts of the South China Sea, in the ASEAN region, where both India and Japan have a deep strategic and economic interests. Number two, China is giving us problems in Ladakh.
Okay.
So I suspect, or I believe, that in the talks starting tomorrow or the day after, between Modi and Kishida, incidentally is no stranger to India. He came here in 2014-15 as foreign minister. And as foreign minister, Fumio Kishida has quite a lot of experience of dealing with our people, our foreign office people, our foreign ministers in the past, and so on.
Okay.
So I think that China and its strategic problems in the region.
Okay.
The Indo-Pacific, which my previous speakers have very rightly emphasized, it was laid down actually by Shinzo Abe in his speech to Parliament in August 2007. I was actually in India at the time for that visit, where he talked about the confluence of the two seas.
Okay.
That was the beginning of this concept, which has evolved in the India-Japan relationship of looking at the Indian Ocean and the Pacific as a continuum, which is important for our strategic relationship.
Okay.
So I think, in addition to all the points that have come up so far, these two strategic issues are bound to come up in fair detail in the coming days.
And those will be really important and significant there, as well as you have elaborated. Mr. Seth, thank you so much for your views and insight. We're running short of time, so I'd like to thank other panelists as well, Professor Pant, Mr. Bharat Joshi, as well as Mr. Sanjay Bhatia, for sharing your views and insight. As our experts were pointing out, of course, India and Japan do share a very, interesting partnership, and a very old one there as well in various aspects, has deep-rooted ties. But there are areas which we need to improve upon, the people-to-people contact being one out there, and the another important significant aspect of this relationship is the strategic aspect as to how both the countries would want to go ahead and approach the geopolitical issues. And those are the issues which are likely to come up for discussion during this bilateral summit. Of course, the focus will be on further enhancing the bilateral economic cooperation as well in various sectors. We'll come back again with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.